He ruled a country for just 2 days, but those 2 days changed the fate of Europe. Arthur Seyss-Inquart wasn't a general or a street-fighting fanatic. He was a lawyer, a smooth-talking bureaucrat. And he gave Hitler exactly what he wanted: Austria. In 1938, under Seyss-Inquart's leadership, the Nazis marched into Vienna without firing a single shot. He welcomed them. He invited them. But that was only the beginning. Later, as Reichskommissar of the Netherlands, he would rule with an iron fist. His administration deported over 100,000 Dutch Jews, crushed resistance movements, and executed civilians in retaliation. At Nuremberg, he stood calm, smiling faintly, as if the blood on his hands could be scrubbed away with clever words. This is not the story of a monster hiding in shadows. This is the story of a man who sold out nations with a pen and sent thousands to death with a signature. An Austrian patriot, or the Nazi within. Arthur was born in 1892 in Moravia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He served in World War I as a soldier, where he was wounded multiple times and awarded for bravery. After the war, he became a lawyer in Vienna, sharp, articulate, and politically conservative. In the unstable years of the Austrian First Republic, Arthur gravitated toward German nationalism. He believed Austria's future belonged not in independence, but in unification with a greater German Reich. Though not originally a member of the Nazi Party, his sympathies were clear. By the early 1930s, as the Nazi movement surged in Germany, Arthur was increasingly seen as a valuable ally by Hitler's Austrian supporters. He was well-spoken, respected by conservatives, and had no criminal past, making him a respectable bridge between old Austrian elites and the radical Nazis. In 1938, Hitler demanded Arthur's appointment as Austria's interior minister. Under pressure, the Austrian chancellor gave in. Within days, Hitler demanded even more, that Arthur be made Chancellor of Austria itself. The president refused, so the Nazis staged a coup, and Arthur was installed anyway. 2 days later, Arthur formally invited Hitler to annex Austria. German troops crossed the border unopposed. Crowds cheered. The Anschluss was complete, and Arthur Seyss-Inquart had delivered his homeland to Hitler, wrapped in a ribbon of legality. The Reich's shadow over Holland. When the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, it was swift and brutal. Dutch forces surrendered in just 5 days. And into that chaos stepped Arthur, calm, calculating, and wearing the polished mask of authority. In 1940, Hitler appointed Arthur Seyss-Inquart as Reichskommissar of the Netherlands, essentially the Nazi governor of an occupied nation. His job was to turn a free country into a tool of the Reich, and he did so with terrifying efficiency. From his office in The Hague, he issued orders that would reshape Dutch society through fear, surveillance, and death. At first, Arthur moved carefully. He kept Dutch civil institutions running and tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. But behind the scenes, he was dismantling Dutch democracy brick by brick. Newspapers were censored, political opposition outlawed, and resistance movements hunted. The noose tightened gradually, until it was too late. Then came the deportations. Under Arthur's direction, more than 100,000 Dutch Jews were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Only a few thousand would survive. Entire families vanished. Their homes were emptied. Their names erased. And Arthur signed every order with the cold logic of a man convinced he was building a better Europe. But resistance did grow. Rail workers sabotaged German shipments. Underground newspapers spread truth. And for every act of defiance, Arthur responded with mass executions, hostage killings, and collective punishment. He ruled not with charisma or ideology, but with quiet, ruthless administration. Collapse and capture. By late 1944, the tide of war had turned. The Allies had landed in Normandy. The Nazis were in retreat. And the Dutch resistance was growing bolder by the day. But Arthur did not loosen his grip. Instead, he tightened it. As German forces fell back, Arthur authorized even harsher crackdowns in the Netherlands. Executions of resistance fighters became a near-daily occurrence. Food blockades were enforced as punishment for defiance, leading to the Hunger Winter of 1944–45, during which tens of thousands of Dutch civilians starved. Arthur's orders were clear: show no mercy. Even as defeat loomed, Arthur remained loyal to Hitler's vision. He rejected attempts at negotiation, insisted that resistance fighters be treated as terrorists, and made sure that any acts of defiance were crushed with force. While other Nazi officials sought escape routes, Arthur clung to the illusion of order and control. But the world outside his Reichskommissariat was crumbling. Berlin fell. Hitler died. The Third Reich collapsed. And in May 1945, Arthur Seyss-Inquart was captured by Allied forces. There were no dramatic shootouts, no defiant last stands, just a man in a suit, surrendering with tired eyes and carefully chosen words. At the time of his arrest, he still insisted he had only done what was necessary. That he had been fair. That he had saved lives by bringing structure to chaos. But the testimonies, the documents, the empty homes in Amsterdam, they all told a different story. Judgment and the final step. At Nuremberg, Arthur sat among the highest-ranking Nazis still alive. Göring, Ribbentrop, Keitel, and him. But unlike the loud denials or arrogant outbursts of others, Arthur remained calm, poised, almost academic. He insisted he had only acted as a civil servant. That he tried to minimize suffering. That his hands were tied. But prosecutors brought the receipts. Documents signed by Arthur ordering mass deportations. Testimonies from Dutch survivors who described how entire neighborhoods vanished overnight. Evidence of reprisal killings, forced labor, and a nation governed under the constant threat of violence. His signature was everywhere. Arthur tried to argue legality. He said he was just following international laws of occupation. That he had done better than others might have. But the courtroom saw through him. His calm was not compassion, it was coldness. His logic wasn't defense, it was denial. On October 1, 1946, Arthur was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The sentence: death by hanging. 16 days later, he was led to the gallows in a quiet, orderly procession. No outbursts. No panic. Just the same stiff composure he'd carried throughout the war. His final words? I hope that my execution will be the last act of the tragedy of the Second World War. He died as he had lived, controlled, careful, and always trying to shape the narrative. But no final speech could erase the horrors of Holland. Arthur's name would live on, not as a statesman, but as a symbol of quiet evil in a sharp suit.